Accessing superannuation at the correct time and in the right way is a key duty of an SMSF trustee, which is why illegal access is something that should be avoided in all circumstances. Joining me today is SMSF Association Technical Manager Fabian Bussoletti to briefly discuss this issue and give us a preview of his session on the matter at this year's SMS Trustee News Trustee Empowerment Day taking place in September. Welcome, Fabian.
Jason, thank you for having me.
Illegal early access to superannuation has been flagged by the ATO as a key issue. Can you briefly describe the size of the issue?
Yeah, for sure. Look, when we look at the ATO statistics that are issued every year around some of the top breaches that are identified in the superannuation space, certainly illegal early access rates quite highly every year. And the ATO have sort of started to do some work around estimating the size of the problem. And for the 21-22 financial year, the ATO had estimated that just over $250 million had been illegally accessed from superannuation. So apart from being a hot topic and a key area of non-compliance, we're now starting to see the ATO put some estimated figures to quantify the problem as well. So yeah, quite a significant problem.
What makes access of superannuation illegal?
Yeah, look, but to answer that question, I think we sort of need to look back at what the superannuation structure is and what it's designed to do. Obviously, there's quite a bit of talk in the media at the moment around the tax concessions that are afforded to the superannuation structure, and those concessions are made available in order for people to be enticed or encouraged to use superannuation as a savings vehicle. But it's a savings vehicle that's designed to save for one's retirement so that those monies are locked up and not accessed until people retire. And then once you reach retirement, that's when we can generally start accessing those monies. And so whilst there's some tax concessions at the front end and along the savings path, the catch to the superannuation structure is that your monies are typically tied up until retirement. And so if you think about that at a high level, that's kind of the way the structure's been designed. And so any attempts for people to access that money prior to meeting a condition of release or one of the times that the superannuation law allows you to access it is effectively what we're talking about when we talk about illegal early access to super.
Illegal access has been promoted through schemes. Can you describe how these things typically operate?
Yeah, look, I think there'd be probably a number of different forms, but I think if I were to think about the ones that are perhaps more commonplace, I guess they'd be schemes that look to encourage people to establish a self-managed super fund, roll their money out of an APRA-regulated fund or a large fund into that self-managed super fund to then enable someone to access those monies. And typically those schemes are designed in such a way that the promoter of that scheme might apply some pressure to that individual, to a vulnerable individual typically, might even offer their support to access those superannuation monies once they've reached the SMSF destination. And I think the reason that self-managed super funds sort of find themselves exposed a little bit is because if we think about large funds, industry funds, retail funds, APRA-regulated funds, accessing your money from one of those typically involves writing, filling out forms, which are then sent to a large independent corporate organisation, and that trustee has to make a decision as to whether or not those benefits can be released legally. Whereas in the self-managed super fund, the trustee of that super fund, the person controlling that super fund, is also the person who has access to the bank account. And so that's why I suppose we probably see self-managed super funds in the spotlight of promoters for these illegal early access schemes.
You mentioned that with an SMSF, the trustee has the ability to access their funds. So aside from schemes, there are other forms of illegal access, and some of our viewers who are trustees themselves may fall into the trap of just taking out their money, which is a form of illegal access, or making a loan to members. Can you explain why those two things might also be illegal access?
Yeah, yeah. Look, well, part of again the design of the superannuation structure is that there's a bunch of rules that we need to observe to preserve those monies and make sure that they are held and used to build for someone's retirement. And so, as a fund trustee has access to the bank account of that super fund, but that doesn't mean that they can access their super monies at any time they like. And those rules that apply to large funds apply equally to self-managed super fund trustees. Of course, drawing a check out of your own bank account or out your own self-managed super funds bank account is a lot easier administratively because we don't need to deal with an independent trustee. But the conditions of release, there are rules, as I touched on earlier, that you have to keep your money in the super environment until retirement. And there's a number of conditions of release that allow you access to super along the way. But if you fail to meet those, then we've breached some of those requirements. And what we sometimes see in practice as well is that fund trustees might take money out of superannuation, um, but one of the requirements for self-managed super funds is that they are audited on an annual basis. And as we start to approach that audit, it might start to become a bit more apparent that they've illegally accessed some of their super monies. And so, in a way to try and fix that problem, they might try and retrofit a solution. And that solution might look like reclassifying the withdrawal as a loan to the member with then attempts made to repay that loan. And so that seems to be a course of action some trustees like to take in an attempt to fix the situation. But unfortunately, one of the other rules that self-managed super funds have to abide by is that they're not permitted to loan money to members or to loan money to relatives of members. And so, whilst it might seem like a simple and easy solution to an illegal release problem, the trustees are in fact creating another compliance related problem for themselves because they're now in breach of a different section altogether. And it's not something that necessarily washes with the tax office, who are well aware of those attempts to reclassify illegal early release amounts.
When you engage in illegal access, how many rules are you likely to break, and what are the potential penalties for breaking those rules?
Yeah, look, very, very much so. It's very much dependent on the nature of the breach itself. I mean, we're also assuming that people are doing illegal or accessing this superannuation illegally intentionally, and there are also genuine errors that may occur. So there might be trustees who genuinely take a withdrawal from the wrong bank account because it might be on the same banking app, for example. So there are some genuine errors. But then, as you say, as we slide up that scale around the intention, whether it's an intentional release, whether we try to classify it as a loan, or whatever the case may be. There's any number of potential breaches along the way. And certainly, if it's a single one off event, then that is less likely to attract a more serious penalty as opposed to someone who has a repeated pattern of behavior of taking regular withdrawals and over a number of years and not rectifying. So it's difficult to describe a particular penalty, but the penalties can be quite severe. With from simple things like the fund not being registered in the first place, because the ATO does do a number of pre-screening tests before accepting the fund, to disqualifying trustees. There are monetary penalties. There's a range of penalties that can be applied. Again, that always depends though on the nature and severity of the breach, as well as the frequency of those breaches and any attempts to rectify as well.
Can you, as a trustee, make good on illegal access, or should you just go to the ATO, hold your hand up, and say, I've made a mistake?
Well, again, it's tricky to answer that one definitively. So, I mean, if you think about someone who's illegally accessed super, the problem that we have is that they might simply think, well, I'm going to put that money back into super and the problem's fixed. And that may well be okay. But whenever we put money into super, we run the risk that that amount is actually a contribution, and that could trigger problems in and of itself. And so the best course of action, I would think, is to engage with your professional advisors, utilize the ATO's voluntary disclosure service. And that's where we, as trustees, approach the tax office and tell them that we've made a mistake. We put forward a plan as to how we're going to fix that mistake, and we execute that plan. And so we're showing the tax office that in good faith, we've acknowledged that we've made an error, we fix that error, and we make an undertaking to not make that error again, I suppose. Would probably be the most palatable course of action. And as I say, there are other courses that are often tried by trustees, but reclassifying as loans. When we go down that path, we actually start to create other problems. So rather than trying to disguise or hope it goes away and it's not picked up at audit, perhaps the best course of action is typically that early engagement with your SMSF professionals, and voluntary disclosure to the tax office with a plan as to how we'll fix it.
There's much more to cover off on this topic, and we're going to be doing a deep dive into your session at our Trustee Empowerment Day that's taking place on the 16th of September in Sydney and the 18th of September in Melbourne. Fabian will be speaking at both events, so if you'd like to come along and see him, follow the link on screen now to find the program and to register. My thanks to Fabian for joining us today and running us through this topic.
Thank you, Jason, and very much looking forward to the Trustee Empowerment Days. What's shaping up to be a very informative and educational event for your attendees.